Joining us today is Joshua Yaphe, a senior fellow at the Center for the National Interest in Washington, D.C. For 15 years, he served as a lead analyst for the Arabian Peninsula at the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, drafting analytical products, briefing policymakers, hosting roundtables, and providing institutional memory on Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, and Yemen. Joshua holds a PhD in history from American University. His most recent book, Time and the Narrative in Intelligence Analysis, was just published this summer. Joshua, thank you so much for coming here, Iran International Studio in Washington, D.C. We're so glad that you're here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
Let's talk about something on Iran that it's for somehow, although in last 46 years is the first time that we are seeing, there's always been some kind of a shadow war, proxy war, military option on the table, but Iran's never been attacked by the United States and Israel directly. And it's still not clear really the extent of damage, how it was. Some would say Iran could retaliate more. Some would say they don't have anything to retaliate. What do you think happened to Islamic Republic of Iran after that military attack in June, 12 days?
Well, I think it's still too soon to be able to judge what direction things are going and what effect it's had. There are a lot of pundits out there who have speculated on trying to read the tea leaves of what they see on Iranian media and state-run channels as to where the regime is at and what they're trying to promote. But again, it's a little too soon. One thing is for certain, this couldn't have come at a worse time for Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. He is reaching the end of his span in tenure in office. In whatever way he ends up leaving, he's not going to have much longer. And the transition is not well laid out or planned. And it couldn't have been worse for the regime than to have this event where the king has no clothes. It's very clear that the Islamic Republic had very little response on the books, ready to go. It had very little planning or preparation for contingencies such as this. And it makes the regime look incredibly weak. And again, this is a real challenge for the regime, on top of all the other problems they face economically with the sanctions and the impact it's having and the loss of allies in Europe, as we've seen with the European Three reinstituting the snapback sanctions. All these things coming together at once, it's very hard to see how the Islamic Republic manages to work its way out of this back into a position of legitimacy. You saw the Supreme Leader on TV addressing crowds on the Friday sermon as the war was at its height, brandishing, if I remember correctly, a rifle at the time, right? It was not a good look. I did have people that monitor Iran very closely and friends who are Iranian who said, no, this played very well in the country and it played very well in the region. That has to be propaganda in so many ways, because the image of this frail old man propped up on a rifle he's probably never fired before, at least not in a very long time, delivering this whispered speech to a staged crowd. It simply drove home the lack of strength that the regime has, the weakness that pervades the upper tiers of the system in general, a system that is a bit lost right now.
On Friday prayers, I think it's a custom in Shia Islam that the Imam of Friday prayer has to have some kind of a weapon in his hand. It's supposed to be sword, but now they keep the gun. So almost everyone on Friday prayer, you see that with the gun. So that comes with that. But you made a point about transition and Khamenei. Do you mean transition to his successor, or do you mean transition after Islamic Republic?
I mean, it's hard to say what comes next. I certainly mean transition of the Supreme Leader, but I think we also have to look at everyone else in this cohort, the whole generation. It started with Rafsanjani's death. That was kind of the signal that there's an end of an era approaching. The people who led the revolution, but more than that, the people who organized the defense during the Iran-Iraq War, the Nasal-e-Sukhta, the folks who built the resistance economy and built this ethos around the sacred defense of the country. They built a whole system, a whole rhetoric, a whole mindset to be able to justify what was not a loss, but was not a victory. And in a sense, perpetuated their control over the system and control over power. But not based on any tangible battlefield wins that they could point to as successes, rather based on their ability to sustain themselves, which in the course of that conflict generated the Pastoran, generated the Basij, generated all of the bunyads. All of the infrastructure of the Islamic Republic that we see today emerged out of that, and the people that were in charge of designing it and implementing it benefited from that system. That generation is retiring or dying. It's not clear what comes next, but it's going to come soon. And you see people recognizing that. You see with Reza Pahlavi and the Prosperity Project that he's launched. And when you look through the defense and security provisions within it, it's very clear that they're going to roll up the Pastoran, they're going to eliminate the Basij, they're going to take a lot of this Islamic revolutionary apparatus that was created over the last 50 years and eliminated or folded into more legitimate institutions. Whether or not you believe that the Pahlavis have a ground game, whether they have an actual presence within the country, at least it's a sign that there is more movement on all sides to address what is a coming issue and a coming problem, that something has to be done with the Islamic Republic. It cannot sustain itself in the direction it's going in the way it wants to.
So that's interesting. You would say even if we put any kind of a, Iran after Islamic Republic, even this Islamic Republic already cannot sustain itself because it has no way to handing over whatever it was to the next leader or the next generation or move it forward.
I mean, to some extent, it's propped up by nostalgia of the older generation, the memories they have of the brutality of what came previous in the 70s, prior to the revolution, the brutality of Savak, the discrepancies between the haves and the have-nots, the wide disparities in income that were generated by the White Revolution, the inability of the Shah's government to get development out into the countryside, and the ability then of the revolution to wipe all that away. There's a nostalgia that's built into that. The achievement of defending the country during the Iran-Iraq War and fending off what could have been an inevitable victory of Saddam Hussein, who is seen as Yazid versus the Imam Hussein in those days. There's so much emotional attachment invested. And again, as that generation passes, what replaces that? It's hard to see how the current regime has designed any sort of alternative to fill that space. They themselves have invested in that space. The regime, in a way, has decided the hill that it will die on. It is the nuclear program. It is opposition to the West. It is this idea, again, going back to the sayings of the imams, that any accommodation is subservience. That fighting for justice and using your courage to defend against tyranny, that these are more valuable than any practical, pragmatic solutions you might have for governance, right? They've invested so much in that ideology that they've decided they will die on that hill. The problem is, it's not going to be a spectacular death. Many people who thought during the 12-day war that the people would rise up and overthrow the regime, which is never going to happen. Again, people were more afraid for their own lives. They were fleeing the capital. There were traffic jams for miles up in any direction. The problem is that the regime has chosen to die on a particular hill, and they're going to die there slowly, in their sleep. It's going to be a very slow, mundane transition. It's not going to be something very sudden and spectacular, where a force comes riding in on a white horse and saves the masses. And so that means that what you have to think about is whose interests are at stake the most. And obviously the people who would be hurt the most from any transition are the institutions of the Islamic Republic, the IRGC, the Basij. These organizations are the ones that are going to lose out the most, and they're the ones that will have to fight the hardest to preserve what little they still have and that remains. So I don't know, when I think about the transition that's underway in Iran, I don't think about a renewal of a mandate for the supreme leader. I certainly don't think that Mujtaba is going to be replacing him in any way, shape, or form. I look more at how the IRGC is going to handle protecting their interests, whether that is a military coup of some sort, or whether it's a negotiation between them and the remnants of the clerical class that retains some element of legitimacy in order to keep an Islamic surface to whatever takes place, while the Pastoran, the IRGC, consolidates its authority underneath that.
So this is the one. So you mean the stakeholder, the biggest stakeholder?
The biggest stakeholders,
is
yes.
The IRGC and Basij and anyone else.
Sadly.
And these people probably now under Khamenei, they're actually fine. But the problem is that if they find another supreme leader that goes along with it, or you think they will just rise up and bring everything on their own hands and in their own control?
They'll have to make a cost-benefit decision as to how much of the edifice of the Islamic Republic can be saved and how much of it has to be replaced. And that's not something I'm an expert to be able to assess. I don't know a lot of people in Washington that would be able to do that. There's a large industry for Iran studies in Washington, as you know. Many hundreds or thousands of people who have expertise in one way, shape, or form in Iran. And part of the problem in Washington has always been that many people make their careers by staking out one end or the other of the political spectrum. They're either very hard against Iran or very soft on Iran. And being able to position themselves on that political spectrum in terms of what our policy should be or shouldn't be often covers or masks their lack of depth on the actual topic. I don't claim to be an expert on Iran. I'm an expert on the Arab Gulf states as much as I've been an expert on anything. But yeah, if that's of interest, that's, you know.
You mentioned the war with Saddam in that time, and those people who were there who are just now they're running things. Do you see any shape or form of a new generation could even be close to that generation that fought that war currently inside Iran?
What does the next generation look like and what are their interests? It's very hard to say. So many of the people you meet who are very well connected in Iran, who are they connected with? They're connected with well-to-do middle-class families in North Tehran who have a very different culture and lifestyle than so much of the rest of the country. You know, what does the average common person in Khuzestan or Hormozgan, far out in the provinces, what do they think about the future of their country? That's very hard to say. So I'm not sure I'm best placed to be able to describe the next generation and what they're going to seek and what they want. I know that across the region, Islamist parties and Islamist institutions are on the downswing. They are not as prominent as they used to be. In many ways, Islam is no longer the answer for everything. The Muslim Brotherhood is taking a back seat. Many of their members hanging out in Turkey, in Istanbul, quietly going about their business. You've seen groups throughout the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, proxies of Iran, that are now on a very weak footing and struggling to reconstitute themselves. Islamism throughout the region is not what it was during the Arab Spring or if you go farther back. So what is the next generation in Iran looking for? That's hard to say, but you can certainly say in other parts of the region, there's a lot less support for Islamist politics than there used to be.
If we take that Islamism has, as you said, this is downfall, could we say it was a direction that it was inevitable for Islamism in that region where with the direction it has, or the hit that Israel did on most radicals in the region, like Hamas and Hezbollah, the big change in Syria, was that something that either had played any part or expedited it in any way?
I'm a firm believer that kinetic action, that the use of force by the Trump administration and by the government in Israel has had a profound change on the dynamics in the region, and that so much of what was done diplomatically to engage Iran was inevitably going to be a failure going back to the Obama administration and the Biden administration. It's not that there shouldn't be a negotiated settlement of some sort. Peace is desirable on all sides, but the type of mediated solution that was envisioned in the JCPOA was never going to have the outcome. It was a diplomatic maneuver that Iran could endlessly spin out and manipulate and turn to their own advantage and play with the clock and wait out Washington in so many ways. And the death of Qasem Soleimani, I think, was a real eye-opener to everyone. There's so many people that on the left that claimed that this would be the start of a world war, and that was nonsense. We've seen time and time again that Iran does not have a coherent and firm response to these types of attacks. They simply had not expected the West to do these things, or for Israel to do these things. Iran is so much happier working within the shadows. The Islamic Republic is so much more content with this covert war. It goes back to 1982 in Syria, the first time that Iran actually tries to confront Israel on the battlefield. And it's by sending troops covertly into the Syrian, through Syria to Lebanon during the Lebanese civil war to try and fight against the Israelis as they've invaded and gone up to the Litani. And Iran's sort of gotten this very comfortable zone ever since, that as long as things are under the table and working within a gray zone, no one's going to respond and no one's ever going to push back. Well, people have pushed back now, and we see the results. And those results are a direct consequence of Iran's actions, and they have decisively changed the dynamic in the region. Does that mean we now see a Pax Israelia in the region? I'm not so sure that we can go that far. I don't think the Israelis are convinced that they can go that far. But definitely the dynamics have substantially changed, and I don't see Hezbollah, Hamas returning to the type of force they were before in any way, shape, or form, which is to the benefit of everyone in the region.
I think you gave lots of credit to President Trump and what he started to do and did and still does. He's doing. What was the thing that nobody in Washington D.C. could get it for 44 years that Trump came in and founded and followed it? What was it that was it a secret? Was it as something that you should not talk about it? What was it?
It's just a different culture. So much of what the Islamic Republic in Iran does is passive aggressive. You see with Lindsay Foreman and Craig Foreman, the various folks from Britain and the French folks who have been arrested. They're hostage taking. It's a very passive aggressive approach to signaling what you want. And it puts the Western governments in an awkward footing. This is not how we work as a government. This is not how we approach foreign affairs. And it makes it very difficult to have a direct conversation about anything because it's simply not how things are done in a Western capital like Washington. But the response to passive aggressiveness anywhere in the world or any individual you're dealing with is to be very direct. It puts them on a weak footing. And we've seen that with Iran then in the last few months, very, very much so.
I'm still not following why in Washington everyone from both administration never thought that, yeah, maybe we should do this to them instead of giving them money or giving them concessions or put them on sanction list.
Yeah, a lot of people on the right point to the George W. Bush administration and they say there was an opening or an opportunity in 2002, 2003 to effect real change in Iran. I remember that period. I remember what went on. In great detail, at least from my young vantage point at the time, Iran was afraid that we would invade. From what I understood, there was not necessarily a big push in the administration at the time to do that. The focus was on Iraq. The focus was on Afghanistan, and to some extent Pakistan. But Iran was open and willing, and there were discussions that took place in Geneva between various Iranian officials and various representatives of the U.S. administration, official, non-official, and people in between. That may have been a missed opportunity, naturally. And the George W. Bush administration took a hands-off approach to Iran after we invaded Iraq, and that didn't go as well. But I think the more important point is the issue is so politicized in Washington. If you are on the left and you want to make a name for yourself, you have to be in favor of mediated solutions. If you are on the right and you want to make a name for yourself, you really have to be in favor of a hardline approach to Iran. You may also agree with those policy attitudes, but that's almost irrelevant to how you make your reputation and how you build your career within this capital. There are people that have deep convictions about these issues, and it does match the rhetoric that they put out, and that's perfectly fine. There are people who have more selfish goals in terms of how they want to position themselves on Iran as an issue. So then, what is a policy debate? When you're dealing with a topic that is so highly politicized, and there's so many people trying to make careers off this issue, it's very hard to have a rational policy debate in that regard. Nonetheless, I do agree with what the Trump administration has done, because you do see the results, and the results are dramatic.
So could we say it's because you pick a jersey and not a substance?
That is often how things are in Washington, yes. Everybody has a team for something. And if you're working in the Middle East, this is the issue that you polarize around.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand the politics of it very well. The one thing that I'm thinking about is when it comes to national security or long-term national interest of the country, there has to be some footings that, you know, either politics to say this is the direction we're going, so that doesn't matter or so. But if politics comes to that, you cannot even sustain that one.
Well, the interesting thing about this current administration is that the president is in charge. President Trump is America first in terms of a policy, in terms of an approach towards the world. Defining what foreign policy under America first means, that is for President Trump to decide. We could have had this debate 5 months ago and questioned what America first is or isn't. But after America conducted the strike on Fordo and contributed to the 12-day war campaign, that issue to great extent is decided within the Republican Party. President Trump is President Trump. We all need to let him be President Trump. And it's interesting then how he has approached both sides of this issue. He has repeatedly put out the idea that negotiations with Iran can take place if the Iranian regime is willing to make the necessary concessions. And it's very clear what those concessions are. There will not be a nuclear program that allows for any sort of military future, right, for that program. In a range of issues, the president has been very clear as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And he has held out the offer of negotiating on that basis repeatedly and continues to. So in a sense, the president is pragmatic in that regard. And he does pay attention to the reality on the ground and how situations evolve and change. He is not an ideologue in any way, shape, or form. No one could accuse the president of being an ideologue. And so that does open all sorts of opportunities, but so much of it is contingent on the regime in Tehran deciding what it wants. And so far, the regime in Tehran wants to keep doing what it's been doing and wants to maintain its access to its resources for itself and promote its interests that it sees in this nuclear program. And there's no change on the horizon in that regard.
Yeah, there's some kind of a semantic going on between Tehran and DC these days. Well, as you said, DC says, you know, we're ready to sit and talk and, you know, put something into action. The Iranians say they want to talk, but they don't want to talk. They have some kind of a condition and say you have to do this, then we started talking. So there's a semantics between going on, but it seems both sides are telling the truth. I think there are certain things that U.S. doesn't want to see, like any shape or form of conversion or move of any nuclear program to any direction that could end up in weaponizing. And at the same time, Iran understands that they have to make a choice and then have to sit and talk. And as you said, it doesn't look like that they made that decision.
The Iranian government doesn't seem to realize that things have changed fundamentally in the relationship between Iran and the United States. If you go back conversations that used to be had in Track 2 forums and various conferences on Iran going back years and years and years, at least in the 20 years that I have experience here in DC on Middle East issues. The conversations were always one of walking on eggshells. There's so much bad blood between the United States and Iran, and so many hurt feelings that go all the way back to 1979, that it's very hard to pierce through that and have a direct conversation about whatever. The Iranian regime still acts and behaves as though that is the conversation. It is no longer the conversation. You're dealing with people in places of power in the White House and other parts of the US government that don't have any experience, knowledge, or interest in that backstory. They've moved on. They only think about real interests and power dynamics and creating effects on the ground. It's a very realpolitik world that we live in Washington right now. And I don't think that Tehran has adjusted to that reality. They don't seem to understand that they can't have that back and forth with various delays and obfuscations and games that they would play to try and string out an endless conversation that never resolves and never goes anywhere. No one in Washington is willing to do that right now, which is to the benefit of the region and benefit of the people of Iran, frankly. The very cut and dry nature and the simple facts. You will abide by the demands of the West to, eliminate these nuclear efforts that you have underway, or the West will act. Israel, the United States will do what they have to do. I don't think Tehran really understands that right now. It still hasn't quite gotten through.
Yeah, that's my obvious question from you. Is it sustainable, even just not taking it given that way? Is it sustainable? Can they even keep going that direction that, as you said, they always wanted to go?
No, you look at pick up the newspapers any given day. They're now talking in Tehran about cutting off 4 zeros from the digits of the currency, as though this will have any effect on the rampant inflation. It's over 1 million rials to the dollar. This is not a sustainable economy. This is not sustainable. The Iranians have done an amazing job as a people to work around the sanctions over the years. They have innovated in so many ways. They have designed pharmaceuticals to compensate for the various drugs they cannot provide. It's to the benefit and the credit of the Iranian people that they are capable of doing these remarkable achievements to work around the various complications involved in being shut off and being a pariah state from the international community, but is not sustainable over a long period of time. A country can survive sanctions for years and decades, as Zimbabwe did, and as Iran has done. But at some point, the political system itself, and this is where we get back to the generation change that's taking place, the political system itself crumbles, and there isn't much of a solution by this older generation as to how to hand over that power and share it more broadly. And that's what's going to eventually undo this.
Something happened with Iran during Biden administration, because Biden administration was really, really willing to give concessions and find some kind of a back to the nuclear deal or so. But Iran took as much as money as it wanted and then helped Russia in the war against Ukraine, which was some kind of a shoot in the foot, because they lost Europe, they lost the European Union, and it was a blatant disregard for what the United States wanted, which was not to jump in and help Russia. Do you think they find this sustainable, and that
their international relationships?
Yeah, if Iran can bundle itself with Russia, and Russia is mostly bundled up with China against the United States during Biden administration, do you think that's sustainable? Is it going somewhere?
Russia has put a lot of vocal support in the media towards Iran the last couple months since the 12-day war. They have said we're not going to abide by the return of the sanctions that the EU, the European three are now reimposing through the UN. Russia has said we're going to invest in more nuclear plants and more nuclear facilities for Iran to help them. But the hard reality is, when push came to shove and the 12-day war happened, Russia was not there to help. Russia was not going to intervene militarily in defense of Iran in the face of what Israel was doing or what the West is doing and what the United States is doing. And Russia was not going to, frankly, politically stand in the way of the IAEA and the UN sanctions. For as much of the rhetoric that Russia is putting out in the media, in a very real sense, Russia is not going to prop up a failing regime, as Russia was not going to prop up the regime in Syria either. A failing regime is a failing regime. Russia's going to look to its own interests and look towards its future. With China, it's a little different story, as anyone can detail for you. China is not dependent on Iran oil sales, but it is reliant on Iranian oil sales to a great extent. And it's very interesting to see the willingness of the Trump administration to go after that right now, to target refineries and ships that are involved in the oil trade with China, sending a signal to China this will not be accepted. That was a very contentious issue the first time around with the maximum pressure campaign in the last Trump administration. And it's refreshing to see the Trump administration go after that again and say we're not going to shy away from targeting the oil sales that go on with China, because that is such a valuable part of China's oil income. But I guess I would just conclude all that by saying that those relationships with China and Russia are not built on the stable foundation that Iran would like them to be based on. And Iran's eagerness to supply drones and supply missiles for the Ukrainian effort, it's more of a desperation of the Iranian part to reinforce to the Russians why they are valuable and why you need to continue to back this relationship. But it's more of a sign of desperation than a sign of strength, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that that ties well with what President Trump said recently. They asked him, what about Iran after the peace Middle East? He says, when we settle Russia, I think then Iran would be easy. I think maybe even he knows that when Russia and China put in some kind of an order to think about the long term, then Iran cannot even do that, if I'm making it correctly.
Oh, I defer to you on that. But what else can I help? What else is interesting?
Last thing I wanted to ask
Yes.
you, you said the UN sanctions are back, economy is bad. One of the most powerful weapons for Iran has been proxy wars all these years throughout the region. They don't have not much left unless Yemen. Do you see any resurgence of Iran proxies in either Syria, Iraq, or that would be Yemen and Yemen would be end of it?
Syria is the most interesting issue because the transitional government has made a very firm decision that they are going to support the United States and its allies on keeping Iran out of the Syrian arena. There are many other issues that Washington wants the transitional government to deal with in Damascus, and they're dragging their heels in certain things. For instance, the foreign nationals who are part of the Syrian military as senior ranks. It's very hard for the transitional government to simply remove these people because they fought in Idlib, and they suffered along with Hayat Tahrir al-Shams and the various fighters who marched into Damascus and took the government. It's very hard to then tell them, you're no longer needed, please go home because Washington told us so. But it's very encouraging to see how the government of Damascus is handling the Iran issue. They've been very tough on any sort of transshipments and Iranian presence in the country. When Israel has wanted to go do operations against Iranian actors present in the country, the transitional government stood aside, said, not our issue. Do what you have to do. And that's such a linchpin for reducing Iran's malign involvement and influence throughout the region, is cutting off those access routes through Syria and the ability to operate in Syria and then therefore move guns, weapons, drugs, and other money to other parties throughout the region. In Lebanon, President Aoun has talked an awful lot about disarming Hezbollah, but hasn't made any actions yet. He's gone into the camps for the Palestinians. My sense with all that is that a lot of President Aoun's rhetoric is trying to dip his toes into the shallow end of the water, hoping that the Americans will back him up. He's trying to gauge how much support he will get from Washington. Not just support from Tom Barrett giving an interview in the media saying, we're very happy with the progress in Lebanon and what President Aoun is doing. But I mean more substantial support, because he can't go disarm Hezbollah on his own. The Lebanese government is not going to be capable of simply telling Hezbollah, hand over your weapons now, you no longer exist as a militia. He needs Western collaboration to be able to do that. So he's saying all the right things now, hoping to see where that will lead. And we'll see where that will lead, but it's very difficult for anyone to get involved in that arena. It's going to have to be the Lebanese government at some point that makes a tough stand on these issues. And I don't think we've then seen the end of it. It's going to be a long process to play out to see how far either side's going to be willing to go in confronting each other. And then I suppose the last thing is Hamas. Hamas was never going to be ousted. You can't get rid of Hamas. You can't get rid of the ideology behind Hamas. You can't get rid of public support for Hamas. There are always going to be people, even at least in the West Bank, that are going to support Hamas. For them, there's no cost to it. They're not being punished in the same way the residents of Gaza are being punished. So it's much easier to be a supporter of Hamas in the West Bank right now, in a sense, than it is in Gaza itself. But the Israeli government has done everything it can to reduce the threat to the most minimal level. But there was never going to be total victory the way some people on the right in Israel hoped that there would be. The concept of total victory does not exist. And we see that the last 2 days, Hamas setting up checkpoints and bullying people and executing rival clans. And it's all in the media, and Hamas is happy to have it filmed as a show of force to anyone that would oppose them. There's not going to be a good solution for that either. Hamas, I don't think, is ever going to reconstitute itself the way it was before, but it's never going to be totally eliminated, and it's going to be then up to the Israeli government to find a mode of accommodation to do raids, to conduct limited actions to go after the people it wants to go after in a way that doesn't totally disrupt the path forward with an international force of a coalition and broad support for resolving the conflict and support from Washington for what Israel wants to do. Israel's going to have to find a way to accomplish what it wants to accomplish without totally jettisoning everything that President Trump has been able to achieve in the last week or so.
You've been very generous with your time. I want to ask
Yes.
my last question.
Oh, there's one more, yes.
Yeah, you've done more than 15 years, 20 years
Yeah.
at the State Department,
Yeah.
briefings, analysis on
was a
that
lot.
part of a region. Have you ever seen Iran all these years as Iran is today? And do you think something from inside happens eventually inside Iran? Because even some of the part of the establishment in Islamic Republic of Iran says, maybe we had enough with this nuclear thing, we should drop it and just go the other way. Some of them are just invested so ideologically and financially. That's if they do that, that would be end of a line for them. So
I would never claim to be an Iran expert. The people I worked with that were with me at the State Department were much, they were true experts on what they did, and I respected them very highly for it. But I do think that we're not going to see dramatic change, either in terms of policy change from the regime in Tehran, or in terms of regime change, either inside the country or from forces acting from outside the country. I do think we're going to see a slow burn, that the situation is never going to get better, it's only going to get worse for the current group of actors that are in charge. But they are reaching the end. The people who pulled the strings and pulled the levers of this regime are at the ends of their careers. Some of them are at the ends of their lives. And so it's a matter then over the next short term, over the next 3 to 5 years, what replaces that? And it's not going to look the same as what we have now, that's for sure.
thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thanks.
Appreciate it.